I walked into my own kitchen that Tuesday afternoon, expecting to find my husband preparing his usual coffee. Instead, I found him pressed against our son's wife, their lips locked in a passionate kiss that made my blood run cold. 42 years of marriage shattered in that single moment. My shopping bags hit the floor with a crash that echoed through our home like a gunshot. They jumped apart so quickly that Jessica stumbled backward, her perfectly lipsticked mouth forming a small O of surprise. Robert's face went white as paper, his hands shaking as he stepped away from her. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. This was my kitchen, my home, the place where I'd cooked thousands of meals for this man, where I'd kissed his forehead every morning for over 4 decades. Jessica recovered first, her young face twisting into something I'd never seen before. Cold, calculating. "It's not what it looks like," she said, smoothing down her blonde hair with trembling fingers. But I knew exactly what it looked like. I knew what I'd seen. The way his hands had been tangled in her hair. The way she'd melted against him like she belonged there. Robert finally found his voice, but the words that came out weren't the apology I desperately needed to hear. "You're imagining things," he said, his tone sharp and defensive. "You've been acting paranoid lately." The betrayal cut deeper than any knife ever could. Not just the kiss, but the immediate lie. The way they both looked at me like I was the problem. Before continuing, if this story is touching your heart, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Don't forget to ring the notification bell, because every day I'm bringing you stories of women who turn their deepest pain into a new, good way of living their lives. Stay with me, because what happened next will show you exactly how far some people will go to destroy the truth. Standing in that kitchen, watching my husband and daughter-in-law scramble to cover their tracks, I felt something break inside me that had nothing to do with the affair itself. It was the sudden crushing weight of 42 years crashing down on my shoulders. 42 years of waking up at 5 in the morning to pack Robert's lunch before his business trips. 42 years of sleeping alone in a cold bed while he traveled the country, building his consulting firm. I told myself I was building our future together, that every sacrifice was an investment in our love. I was 21 when we married, just a girl really with dreams of becoming a teacher. But Robert's career demanded everything. Someone had to stay home with Michael when he was born. Someone had to be the stable foundation while Robert chased bigger contracts in distant cities. That someone was always me. I remember the night Robert missed Michael's first steps because he was closing a deal in Vancouver. I called him, tears streaming down my face, describing how our baby had wobbled across the living room toward me. Robert's response still echoes in my mind. "Get it on video next time. I'm in the middle of something important." But I convinced myself it was temporary, that once his business was established, once we were financially secure, he'd be present. He'd be the husband and father we needed him to be. The years blended together in a haze of school plays attended alone, parent-teacher conferences where I made excuses for Robert's absence, and birthday parties where I played both mother and father. Michael would ask why Daddy wasn't there, and I'd smile and say, "Daddy's working hard for our family, sweetheart." When Robert's mother developed dementia, guess who became her caregiver? When his father had his stroke, guess who drove him to therapy appointments 3 times a week for 8 months? I juggled caring for 2 aging parents who weren't even my own, while Robert sent money from hotel rooms across the country. "You're so good at this," he'd say during his brief visits home. "I don't know how you manage it all." I managed it because I had no choice. I managed it because that's what wives do, what mothers do. We hold everything together while the men in our lives chase their ambitions. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd sacrificed my teaching dreams to raise 1 child while supporting 3 adults. Yet somehow Robert got all the credit for being the provider. When Michael announced his engagement to Jessica 2 years ago, I was genuinely thrilled. Finally, our son had found someone to love him the way I'd always loved his father. Someone young and beautiful and full of life. I threw myself into wedding planning with Jessica like she was the daughter I'd never had. We spent hours together choosing flowers, tasting cakes, debating between ivory and champagne for her dress. She'd curl up on my couch with her laptop, showing me Pinterest boards full of dreams and possibilities. "I want our home to feel as warm as yours," she'd tell me, squeezing my hand. "You've created something so beautiful here. I hope I can be half the wife and mother you are." Those words meant everything to me. Here was validation that my sacrifices hadn't been in vain, that the life I'd built, the love I'd poured into this family, was visible and valuable. I taught her my grandmother's recipe for pot roast, the one Robert claimed was his favorite. I shared the secrets of keeping houseplants alive, showed her how to iron Robert's shirts, the way he liked them. We bonded over our shared desire to create something beautiful and lasting. At their wedding, watching Michael spin Jessica around the dance floor, I felt such profound satisfaction. This was what I'd worked for. This was the family legacy I'd spent decades building. Love that would last. Commitment that would endure. Robert made a toast that night that brought tears to my eyes. "To my beautiful wife," he said, raising his glass toward me across the crowded reception hall. Without her sacrifice and dedication, none of this would be possible. She taught our son what real love looks like. Everyone applauded. Jessica blew me a kiss from the head table. Michael mouthed thank you with tears in his eyes. I believed every word Robert said. I believed that our marriage, despite its challenges, was the foundation everything else was built on. That my years of putting everyone else first had created something beautiful and unbreakable. After the wedding, Jessica would stop by every week. She'd help me with grocery shopping, ask for advice about married life, bring me little gifts from her shopping trips. We'd sit in this same kitchen where I'd just caught her betraying me, drinking tea and talking about her hopes for the future. "I want to be married as long as you and Robert," she'd say, stirring honey into her cup. 40 years together, that's such an inspiration. She seemed so sincere, so genuinely grateful for my guidance and acceptance. When she asked me about the early years of my marriage, I shared everything. The loneliness during Robert's frequent trips, the way we'd grown apart and then back together, how marriage required patience and forgiveness and unwavering commitment. "Sometimes I worry Michael takes me for granted," she confessed one afternoon. "The way men do when they're busy building their careers." I assured her it was normal, that men show love differently, that the important thing was to be supportive and understanding while they figured out how to balance everything. I was teaching her how to be the perfect wife for my son, all while she was seducing my husband behind my back. The cruelest part wasn't just the affair itself. It was how she'd used our relationship, our growing friendship, to get closer to Robert, how she'd studied me like a textbook, learning exactly what kind of woman I was so she could position herself as everything I wasn't. Young where I was aging, exciting where I was predictable, available where I was always busy caring for everyone else. Standing there in my kitchen, looking at their guilty faces, I realized that every moment of closeness I'd shared with Jessica had been a lie. Every confidence I'd shared about my marriage had been ammunition she could use against me. But the deepest cut was still coming, because when I tried to tell Michael what I'd witnessed, when I begged my own son to believe his mother's eyes over his wife's lies, he chose her. He chose to believe that I was jealous, bitter, trying to destroy his happiness. After everything I'd sacrificed, after everything I'd given up to build this family, he chose her. The confrontation with Michael happened 3 days after I caught them. 3 days of sleepless nights, of staring at my bedroom ceiling while Robert snored peacefully beside me like nothing had happened. 3 days of Jessica's sickly sweet text messages asking if I was feeling all right, if there was anything she could do to help. The manipulation was breathtaking in its audacity. I called Michael and asked him to come over alone. I needed to tell him what I'd seen, needed my son to understand that his marriage was built on lies. When he walked into my living room, I could see Jessica's influence already poisoning his thoughts. His face was closed off, defensive before I'd even spoken. "Mom, Jessica told me you've been acting strange lately," he said, settling into the armchair his father usually occupied. "She's worried about you." "We both are." The words hit me like ice water. She'd gotten to him first, planted seeds of doubt about my mental state, my reliability as a witness to my own life. "Michael, I need you to listen to me carefully," I began, my voice steadier than I felt. 3 days ago, I walked into this house and found your father kissing your wife. Not a friendly peck, a passionate, intimate kiss between two people who are clearly having an affair." Michael's face went through a series of expressions: shock, disbelief, then something that looked almost like pity. Mom, that's impossible. Dad loves you. Jessica loves me. You must have misunderstood what you saw. I know what I saw, Michael. Your wife had her hands in your father's hair. He was holding her like he used to hold me when we were young. There was no misunderstanding. Michael ran his hands through his hair, a gesture so much like his father it made my chest ache. Look, I know this is hard to hear, but Jessica thinks you might be having some kind of episode, maybe early onset dementia or something. She said you've been forgetting conversations, repeating yourself, getting confused about details. The ground shifted beneath my feet. This wasn't just denial. This was a coordinated campaign to discredit me. Jessica had been building this narrative for weeks, maybe months, laying the groundwork to make me look unstable, unreliable. Michael, I am not confused or forgetful or having an episode. I am a woman who caught her husband cheating with her daughter-in-law, and instead of support from her son, I'm being gaslit and dismissed. But I could see in his eyes that the poison had already taken root. Jessica's version of reality had become his truth. Mom, I think you should see someone. Talk to a professional. Jessica found this great therapist who specializes in get out. The words came out quiet, but sharp as broken glass. Mom, please, get out of my house, Michael. Come back when you're ready to believe your own mother over a woman who's been in our family for less than 2 years. After he left, I sat in that empty living room and understood with crystal clarity that I was truly alone. Robert was pretending nothing had happened. Jessica was actively working to destroy my credibility, and my own son thought I was losing my mind. That's when something shifted inside me. The hurt began transforming into something else, something harder and more dangerous. I spent the next week watching, really watching, paying attention to patterns I'd been too trusting to notice before. Robert's business trips had become more frequent in the past 6 months, always overnight stays, always in cities close enough for Jessica to drive to visit her college friend or attend a work conference. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. I started checking Robert's home office, the space I'd always respected as his private domain. In the back of his filing cabinet, behind folders marked insurance and tax documents, I found a manila envelope that made my blood run cold. Bank statements for an account I'd never seen before. Credit card bills for charges I didn't recognize. Hotel receipts dating back 8 months, long before I'd caught them in the kitchen. This affair had been going on for most of Jessica's marriage to Michael. But that wasn't the worst discovery. There were photographs. Robert and Jessica at restaurants I'd never been to. Robert and Jessica on what looked like weekend getaways. Robert and Jessica in hotel rooms. And some of those photos were intimate enough to make me feel sick. At the bottom of the envelope was a legal document that stopped my heart entirely. A consultation with a divorce attorney dated 2 weeks before I caught them. Robert had been planning to leave me, and according to the notes, he'd been discussing how to minimize his financial obligations. The attorney had advised him to document any signs of mental instability in his wife. Jessica hadn't been improvising when she told Michael I might have dementia. This was a calculated strategy to make me look incompetent so Robert could divorce me cheaply and cleanly. Before we continue, make sure to like this video and subscribe. With your support, we can keep bringing more stories from powerful women that touch the heart of all of us. I was sitting at my kitchen table, surrounded by evidence of their betrayal, when my neighbor Margaret knocked on my back door. Margaret had lived next door for 15 years, and we'd shared countless conversations over the fence while tending our gardens. "Honey, I need to tell you something," she said, settling into the chair across from me with a cup of coffee. "I've been struggling with whether to say anything, but after seeing how upset you've looked lately..." My heart started racing. "What is it, Margaret?" "I've seen them together. Robert and that girl, multiple times over the past few months. At first I thought maybe they were planning a surprise for you or Michael, but..." She paused, her weathered hands fidgeting with her coffee cup. The way they were acting, it wasn't innocent. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because I hoped I was wrong. Because I know how much your family means to you. But when I saw you looking so lost these past few days, I realized keeping quiet was just making me part of their lie." Margaret had seen them leaving together when I was at my book club meetings. She'd watched Jessica's car parked in hotel lots when she was supposedly visiting friends. She'd witnessed Robert's hands on Jessica's waist as they stood in our driveway, thinking no one could see them. "There's something else," Margaret said quietly. "Last month, when you were visiting your sister, I saw them both at your house, together, for hours. They'd been using my own home, the place I'd spent decades making beautiful and welcoming. They'd been defiling the bed I shared with Robert, probably laughing about how naive and trusting I was. That night, I called my sister Carol in Montreal, the only family member I trusted completely. "I need you to help me understand something," I said, and told her everything. The affair, Michael's reaction, the evidence I'd found. Carol was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that changed everything. "You know what this reminds me of? Remember when Tom cheated on me? How he spent months telling everyone I was paranoid and jealous before I found out he was having an affair. Tom was Carol's ex-husband, and I remembered how he'd systematically undermined her credibility before abandoning her for his secretary. This isn't just about sex," Carol continued. "This is about money and control. Robert's trying to position himself as the victim of a mentally unstable wife so he can walk away with everything. And Jessica's helping him because she thinks she'll get to keep the life you built." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Robert wasn't just having a midlife crisis affair. He was orchestrating my downfall so he could start fresh with a younger woman and keep most of his assets. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated me. They'd assumed that after 42 years of putting everyone else first, I'd quietly accept their version of reality and fade away gracefully. They were about to learn exactly how wrong they were. I spent the rest of that evening planning. Not revenge. That was too simple, too emotional. I was planning justice. Strategic, methodical, complete justice that would expose them both and restore my dignity. Because I wasn't just fighting for my marriage anymore. I was fighting for my sanity, my reputation, and my right to be believed in my own life. And I was going to win. Michael's birthday was 2 weeks away, and I knew it would be the perfect stage for the truth to finally come to light. For 32 years, I'd hosted his birthday dinners in our family home. This year would be no different, except for one crucial detail. This time, I'd be serving justice alongside the cake. I spent those 2 weeks preparing with the precision of a military strategist. I made copies of every document I'd found, the bank statements, hotel receipts, photographs, and that damning consultation with the divorce attorney. I organized everything chronologically, building an undeniable timeline of deception. Margaret agreed to be my witness, and I asked Carol to drive down from Montreal. If I was going to confront them publicly, I needed allies in that room who couldn't be dismissed or discredited. The hardest part was pretending everything was normal. Robert continued his charade of the devoted husband, bringing me flowers and commenting on how much better I looked lately. Jessica kept up her concerned daughter-in-law act, texting me daily to check on my health and suggesting I should really see that therapist she'd recommended. Their performance was flawless, and it made my skin crawl. On the morning of Michael's birthday, I cooked all his favorite foods just like I had every year since he was a child. Pot roast with vegetables, homemade dinner rolls, and the chocolate cake with peanut butter frosting that took me 3 hours to make from scratch. Jessica arrived early to help, wearing a flowing sundress that made her look even younger than her 27 years. She kissed my cheek and complimented the decorations, playing her role perfectly. "You've outdone yourself again," she said, arranging flowers in a vase. "Michael is so lucky to have a mother who cares this much." Robert appeared behind her, straightening his tie and checking his appearance in the hallway mirror. At 65, he was still handsome in that distinguished way that had first attracted me 43 years ago. Silver at his temples, laugh lines around his eyes, though I now realized those lines might have come from laughing at my expense. "Smells incredible in here," he said, wrapping his arms around my waist from behind and kissing my neck. My beautiful wife, still spoiling us after all these years. The casual intimacy of his touch made me want to vomit. This man who'd been planning to divorce me, who'd been photographed in hotel beds with our daughter-in-law, was still playing the role of devoted husband with Oscar-worthy commitment. When Michael arrived with Carol and Margaret, the evening began like every other birthday celebration. We gathered around the dining room table that had witnessed thousands of family meals, conversations about school and work, and dreams for the future. But tonight, it would witness something else entirely. I served dinner and listened to the familiar rhythm of family conversation. Robert telling stories from his latest business trip. Stories I now knew were fabricated covers for his hotel rendezvous with Jessica. Jessica laughing at his jokes, her hand resting casually on Michael's shoulder while her eyes met Robert's across the table. The performance was breathtaking in its audacity. After we finished eating, I stood up to clear the plates. This was the moment I'd been preparing for, and my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Before we have cake," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins, "I have something I need to share with everyone." I walked to the sideboard where I'd hidden the manila folder containing all my evidence. The room fell silent as I returned to the table and placed it in the center, right next to the birthday cake I'd spent hours making. "Michael, I know you think I'm confused or having memory problems. Jessica has been very concerned about my mental state, haven't you, dear?" Jessica's face went pale, but she managed to smile. "We just want you to get the help you need. That's very thoughtful of you both. Robert, you've been so supportive too, bringing me flowers and telling everyone what a devoted wife I am." Robert shifted in his chair, his politician's instincts sensing danger but not yet understanding the threat. "What's this about?" Michael asked, looking between me and the folder with growing concern. I opened the folder and pulled out the first photograph, Robert and Jessica at a restaurant downtown, his hand covering hers across a candlelit table. "This is about the fact that your father has been having an affair with your wife for the past 8 months. The silence that followed was deafening. Jessica's face went from pale to gray. Robert's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Michael grabbed the photograph from my hands, studying it with the intensity of someone trying to decode hieroglyphics. This could be anything. Maybe they were planning something for your anniversary or—" I placed the second photograph on the table. Robert and Jessica in a hotel room, embracing in a way that left no room for innocent interpretation. Or maybe they were planning this. Jessica finally found her voice, though it came out as a strangled whisper. "Those pictures are fake. Anyone can doctor photos these days." "Really?" I pulled out the hotel receipts, credit card statements, and bank records. "Are these fake too?" 8 months of hotel stays that coincide perfectly with your supposed visits to college friends. Robert's secret bank account that he's been using to fund your romantic getaways. Robert stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "This is ridiculous. You've clearly had some kind of breakdown and—" "Sit down, Robert." My voice cut through his protests like a blade. "I'm not finished." I pulled out the legal consultation document, the one that outlined his strategy for divorcing me while minimizing his financial losses. "This is your consultation with Harold Morrison, divorce attorney. You met with him 2 weeks before I caught you kissing Jessica in our kitchen. You discussed documenting signs of mental instability in your wife. That's me. In case anyone's confused, so you could claim I was unfit and reduce your alimony obligations." Michael snatched the document from my hands, his face cycling through disbelief, hurt, and growing rage as he read. "Jessica," he said without looking up from the papers, "you've been telling me for weeks that Mom might have dementia." Jessica's carefully constructed facade finally began to crack. "I was trying to help. She's been acting so strange, so paranoid. She's been acting like a woman who caught her husband cheating." Carol interjected, her voice sharp with indignation. "Everything she suspected was true, and instead of supporting her, you gaslit her into questioning her own sanity." Margaret spoke up for the first time since arriving. "I've been watching this unfold from next door for months. I saw them together when you thought no one was looking. I watched Jessica's car in hotel parking lots. I witnessed them using this house when she was supposed to be out of town." The weight of testimony from multiple witnesses was crushing. Robert and Jessica's coordinated lies crumbled under the simple truth told by people who had no reason to fabricate. Michael stood up slowly, the legal document still clutched in his shaking hands. When he finally looked at Jessica, his face was transformed by a rage I'd never seen in my gentle son. "You made me think my mother was losing her mind. You made me question her sanity, her memory, her ability to trust her own eyes. While she was suffering, thinking she was going crazy, you were screwing my father and planning to steal her life." Jessica tried to reach for him, but he stepped back like she was contaminated. "Michael, please, let me explain." "Explain what?" How you manipulated me into betraying my own mother. How you used our marriage as cover while you destroyed my family. Robert attempted damage control, his salesman's instincts kicking in even as his world collapsed. Son, this is all a misunderstanding. Your mother has been under a lot of stress lately, and she's clearly misinterpreted some innocent... Dad. Michael's voice was deadly quiet. I've seen the photos. I've read your legal consultation notes. I've heard testimony from 3 different witnesses. The only misunderstanding here is how I could have been stupid enough not to see what was happening in my own family. Robert's face flushed red with desperation and anger. After everything I've provided for this family, after 42 years of marriage, you're going to believe this fabricated nonsense over your own father? That's when the mask finally slipped completely. You think you can threaten me with divorce papers and take half of everything I've worked for? You think you can destroy my reputation and walk away rich? I built this company from nothing while you played house. The venom in his voice revealed the man he'd hidden behind decades of charm and manipulation. This was who Robert really was, someone who saw our marriage as a business arrangement and me as an obstacle to his happiness. Jessica, seeing her meal ticket evaporating before her eyes, made one last desperate play. Michael, you have to understand, your father and I never meant for this to happen. We tried to fight it, but sometimes love just... Love? The word exploded from Michael like a curse. You call destroying my family love? You call making me think my mother was mentally ill love? He threw the legal documents across the table, papers scattering like autumn leaves. I want both of you out of my life, forever. The birthday cake sat untouched in the center of the table. 32 candles melted into colorful wax puddles as my family disintegrated around it. But for the first time in 8 months, I felt like I could finally breathe. The truth was out, and I was no longer fighting this battle alone. The legal proceedings that followed were swift and merciless. Harold Morrison, the attorney Robert had consulted about divorcing me cheaply, refused to represent him after learning about the evidence I possessed. Professional ethics, he claimed, though I suspected it was more about protecting his reputation than any moral stance. Robert was forced to hire a different lawyer, one who charged twice Morrison's fees and had half his competence. Meanwhile, I found myself represented by Sarah Chen, a sharp-eyed family law specialist who took one look at my evidence and smiled like a shark smelling blood in the water. Your husband made a critical error, she told me during our first meeting. By documenting his intent to claim you were mentally unstable, he's provided written proof of his manipulation and fraud. This isn't just adultery, it's attempted financial abuse of a vulnerable spouse. The divorce settlement reflected Sarah's expertise. Robert discovered that attempting to portray me as incompetent while simultaneously trying to minimize his obligations had backfired spectacularly. The court awarded me the house, half his business assets, and a substantial monthly support payment that would ensure my comfortable independence for the rest of my life. But the real justice came through social consequences that no legal system could have imposed. Word spread through our community like wildfire. The story of a respected businessman who'd tried to gaslight his wife of 42 years while carrying on with their daughter-in-law became the scandal that dominated every coffee shop and book club conversation for months. Robert's business clients began canceling contracts, unwilling to work with someone they now saw as fundamentally dishonest. If he could betray his own wife so calculatedly, they reasoned, what might he do to business partners? Jessica faced her own reckoning when Michael filed for divorce and demanded she return every wedding gift, every piece of jewelry, everything he'd given her during their brief marriage. She'd gambled on trading a young husband for an older, wealthier one, but ended up losing both. The most satisfying moment came 6 months after that devastating birthday dinner, when I learned that Robert and Jessica's affair had collapsed under the weight of reality. Apparently, sneaking around in hotel rooms was exciting, but living together in a modest apartment while facing social exile and financial ruin was considerably less romantic. Jessica moved back to her hometown in Alberta, her dreams of social climbing reduced to working at her mother's beauty salon. Robert found himself alone in a cramped apartment, his reputation in ruins and his business hanging by a thread. Meanwhile, my life was transforming in ways I never could have imagined. It started at the community center, where I'd begun volunteering with the literacy program. I needed something to fill the hours, something meaningful that would remind me I had value beyond being someone's wife or mother. That's where I met Henry. He was there with his book club, a group of retirees who gathered weekly to discuss everything from mystery novels to historical biographies. Henry had been widowed 3 years earlier and was, like me, learning to rebuild his life after losing the person he'd expected to grow old with. Unlike Robert, Henry actually listened when I spoke. He asked questions about my thoughts and opinions, not to find flaws or ammunition, but because he genuinely cared about my perspective. When I told him about my abandoned dream of becoming a teacher, he didn't dismiss it or suggest it was too late. "You know," he said over coffee after one of our book discussions, "the literacy program is always looking for volunteer tutors. You have a gift for explaining things clearly." Henry was right. Working with adult learners who were struggling to read became one of the most fulfilling experiences of my life. These were people who'd been dismissed or overlooked by society, told they weren't smart enough or that it was too late to change. I understood that feeling intimately. Helping Maria, a 50-year-old housekeeper, read her first complete novel. Watching James, a retired construction worker, write his first letter to his grandchildren. These victories meant more to me than 42 years of keeping Robert's house perfect and his dinner warm. Henry and I grew closer through shared purpose rather than shared desperation. We both understood loss, but we also understood hope. We talked about books and ideas, took long walks through the neighborhood, shared quiet dinners where conversation flowed naturally instead of being performed for an audience. When he proposed on a crisp October evening, we were sitting on my back porch watching the maple tree in my yard turn brilliant shades of red and gold. There were no dramatic gestures or elaborate presentations, just two people who'd found unexpected happiness in the second half of their lives. "I love who I am when I'm with you," he said simply, taking my hand in his weathered one. "I'd like to spend whatever time we have left discovering what else we might become together." Our wedding was small and intimate, held in Margaret's garden with just a few close friends and Michael, who'd slowly begun rebuilding his relationship with me once the dust settled. No photographers, no elaborate reception, no guests who were there for appearances rather than affection. But it was perfect in ways my first wedding never was. This time, I wasn't a young girl surrendering her dreams to support someone else's ambitions. I was a woman who knew her own worth, choosing to share her life with someone who appreciated and cherished that worth. Henry moved into my house, the house I'd fought for and won, the house that was finally truly mine. We converted Robert's old office into a shared library, filled with books we'd read together and stories we wanted to explore. Standing in my kitchen now, the same kitchen where I'd caught Robert and Jessica, I felt nothing but peace. The room had been cleansed of betrayal and filled with new memories. Henry humming while he made his morning coffee, Margaret stopping by with vegetables from her garden, Michael bringing his new girlfriend to meet the woman who taught him what real strength looked like. If this story moved you, click on the next video that's appearing on the screen now. I'm sure you'll be surprised by this new emotional and heartbreaking story I have right here to tell you. Looking back, I realized that affair was the greatest gift Robert ever gave me. It forced me to rediscover who I was beneath 42 years of being what everyone else needed me to be. I learned that betrayal, while devastating, isn't the end of the story. It's simply the moment when you discover whether you'll accept the life others have written for you, or whether you'll have the courage to write your own ending. I chose to write my own ending, and it was beautiful.